The iron shackles bit into Adelaide Norton's wrists as she stood on the auction block in Rico, Colorado. Her eyes burning with fury and tears she refused to shed, while a crowd of dusty miners and ranchers assessed her like cattle. 3 days ago she had been a respectable schoolteacher, and now she was being sold to the highest bidder because her brother had vanished into the mountains with someone else's money, leaving her to face the consequences of a debt she had never agreed to. The auctioneer's voice droned on about her qualities, her education, her ability to read and write, as if these things made her more valuable as property. The July heat of 1881 beat down mercilessly on the wooden platform, and Adelaide could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her simple cotton dress. She kept her chin high, refusing to give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. $500, called a grizzled prospector with tobacco-stained teeth. $600, countered a saloon owner whose reputation made Adelaide's stomach turn. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure in a black hat pushed forward. Adelaide couldn't make out his features clearly against the glare of the sun, but something about the way he moved suggested controlled power, like a mountain lion stalking through the brush. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, and when he finally reached the front of the crowd, she caught a glimpse of sharp gray eyes beneath the brim of his hat. $1,000, he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the gathering. The crowd fell silent, turning to stare at the stranger. The auctioneer's eyes lit up with greed. 1,000 going once, going twice, 1,200, the saloon owner shouted, not wanting to lose his prize. The stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $2,000, cash. Right now. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was more money than most men in Rico saw in a year. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down before anyone else could bid. Sold to the gentleman in black. Adelaide felt her knees go weak, but forced herself to remain standing. She didn't know if she had just been saved or condemned to something worse. The stranger moved through the crowd to the platform, producing a thick roll of bills that he counted out with careful precision into the auctioneer's greedy hands. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 years old, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Keys," he said to the auctioneer, holding out his hand. The auctioneer handed over the keys to her shackles with a smirk. "Pleasure doing business with you, mister. She's all yours now, legal and proper." The stranger's gray eyes flickered with something that might have been disgust, but he said nothing. He stepped onto the platform and approached Adelaide, who instinctively took a step back. He paused, then held up the keys where she could see them. "I'm going to unlock these," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "Then we're going to walk out of here together. Can you do that?" Adelaide stared at him, trying to read his intentions in those storm cloud eyes. She saw no cruelty there, no hungry possession like she had seen in the other bidders, but she had learned in the past 3 days that she could no longer trust her judgment of men. "Do I have a choice?" she asked, her voice hoarse from thirst and barely suppressed emotion. Something flickered across his face. "Not right now, but you will. I promise you that." He unlocked the shackles, and Adelaide gasped as blood rushed back into her wrists, bringing pins and needles of pain. She swayed slightly, and the stranger's hand shot out to steady her elbow, but he released her as soon as she had regained her balance. He took off his vest and draped it over her shoulders, shielding her from the hungry stares of the crowd. "This way," he said, gesturing toward a large black horse tied to a hitching post nearby. Adelaide walked beside him on unsteady legs, acutely aware of every eye watching them. The crowd parted to let them through, and she heard muttered comments and crude jokes that made her face burn. The stranger's hand moved to rest on his gun, and the comments ceased immediately. When they reached his horse, he pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. Adelaide took it with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water soothing her parched throat. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until the cool liquid touched her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and took the canteen back when she was finished. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Good, we have a long way to go." He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down to help her up. Adelaide hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted beneath their combined weight, and she had to grab onto the stranger's waist to keep from sliding off. "What's your name?" she asked as they started down the main street of Rico, leaving the auction and the jeering crowd behind. "Harrison Moss," he replied. "And before you ask, no, I don't make a habit of buying women at auctions." Despite everything, Adelaide felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. She choked it back down. "Then why did you buy me?" "Because somebody had to get you out of there, and I happened to have the money." He paused, then added, "And because I've been investigating your brother's disappearance. I know you had nothing to do with his crimes." Adelaide's hands tightened on his waist. "You know about Daniel. You know where he is." "I know some things. We'll talk more when we're somewhere safe. Right now, I want to get clear of this town before anyone decides they want a refund." They rode in silence after that, leaving Rico behind as they climbed into the San Juan Mountains. The afternoon sun painted the peaks in shades of gold and purple, and the air grew cooler as they ascended. Adelaide had no idea where Harrison was taking her, but at this point, anywhere was better than that auction block. After an hour of riding, Harrison guided the horse off the main trail and into a small clearing beside a creek. He dismounted and helped Adelaide down, steadying her when her legs nearly gave out from the strain of the ride. "Rest here," he said, gesturing to a fallen log. "I'll make us a fire and some coffee." Adelaide sank onto the log gratefully, watching as Harrison moved with efficient economy, gathering kindling and starting a fire with the ease of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors. He filled a battered coffee pot from the creek and set it on the fire, then pulled out some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "It's not much, but it'll keep you going until we reach the cabin," he said, offering her the food. Adelaide took it, suddenly ravenous. She hadn't eaten since the previous day, and even the tough jerky tasted like a feast. Harrison settled on the opposite side of the fire, giving her space, and pulled out a small leather notebook from his coat pocket. "I need to ask you some questions about your brother," he said, looking up at her. "If you're up to it." Adelaide swallowed her mouthful of jerky and nodded. "What do you want to know?" "When was the last time you saw Daniel?" 3 weeks ago. He came to my boarding house in the middle of the night, packed a bag, and left. He wouldn't tell me what was wrong, just said he had to leave town for a while and that I should stay away from his business affairs." Her voice cracked slightly. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have made him tell me." "You couldn't have stopped what happened," Harrison said gently. "Your brother got mixed up with some dangerous people. He was working as a bookkeeper for Marcus Granger, one of the biggest mine owners in the territory. Granger accused Daniel of embezzling $5,000 from the company accounts." "That's impossible," Adelaide said immediately. "Daniel would never steal. He's always been honest to a fault." "I believe you," Harrison said, surprising her. "I've been going through the account books myself, and something doesn't add up. The numbers have been altered, but not by your brother. Someone else doctored those books and made it look like Daniel was responsible." Hope flared in Adelaide's chest. "Can you prove it?" "I'm working on it." But Granger has the town marshal in his pocket, and most of the legitimate businessmen in Rico are afraid to cross him. When Daniel disappeared, Granger decided that someone needed to pay back the debt. He found an old territorial law that says family members can be held responsible for debts in cases of fraud. Harrison's expression darkened. It's rarely enforced anymore, but Granger has enough influence to make it stick. He had you arrested and set up that auction, intending to recoup his losses by selling you. Adelaide felt sick. Why didn't you go to the authorities in Denver or somewhere else? Surely someone would listen. I tried. The territorial governor's office said they needed more evidence before they could intervene. These things take time, and you didn't have time. Granger was moving fast. Harrison closed his notebook and met her eyes across the fire. I couldn't let him sell you to someone who would abuse you or worse, so I came up with the money and bought you myself. $2,000 is a fortune. How did you have that much? Harrison looked away, staring into the fire. I used to be a Pinkerton agent. Saved most of my pay over the years. Figured I'd use it to buy some land, start a ranch someday, but this seemed more important. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. This stranger had given up his dreams to save her from a nightmare. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You don't owe me anything, Harrison said firmly. What Granger did was wrong. What they all did was wrong. I'm going to prove your brother's innocence and bring down the people responsible. But that's going to take time, and in the meantime, you need somewhere safe to stay. The cabin you mentioned. I have a place about 10 miles from here, up in the high country. It's remote, but it's comfortable enough. You'll be safe there while I continue the investigation. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. I know you have no reason to trust me, Miss Norton, but I give you my word as a man of honor that I will not harm you or take advantage of you in any way. You have my protection, nothing more, nothing less. Adelaide wrapped her hands around the warm cup, studying Harrison's face in the firelight. She had been a good judge of character before all this happened, and everything about this man suggested integrity. The way he had given her space, the way he spoke to her with respect rather than as property he had purchased, the way he had sacrificed his savings to save her. I believe you, she said finally, and please call me Adelaide. A slight smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. Adelaide, that's a pretty name. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and then Harrison kicked dirt over the fire and helped Adelaide back onto his horse. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail grew narrower and more treacherous, but Harrison guided his horse with sure confidence, and Adelaide found herself relaxing against his broad back, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day. When they finally reached the cabin, full darkness had fallen, and stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain air. The cabin was larger than Adelaide had expected, built of sturdy logs with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Harrison lit a lantern and led her inside, revealing a single large room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a table and chairs, and a bed in one corner covered with colorful quilts. You take the bed, Harrison said immediately. I'll sleep on the floor. I can't take your bed, Adelaide protested. You can and you will. I've slept on harder ground than this floor many times. He set about lighting the fire in the hearth, and soon warmth began to fill the cabin. There's a pump outside for water, and I've got supplies for cooking. Are you hungry? Starving, Adelaide admitted. Harrison smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes and transformed his face. I make a decent stew. Why don't you rest while I cook? Adelaide wanted to help, but her body felt like lead, and she sank onto one of the wooden chairs at the table instead. She watched as Harrison moved around the small kitchen with surprising skill, pulling out vegetables, dried meat, and herbs. He worked quietly, and Adelaide found herself studying him more closely now that they were in the light. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. There was a gentleness in the way he handled things, a carefulness that suggested a man who knew his own strength and chose to restrain it. The gun at his hip was well maintained but showed signs of use, and Adelaide found herself wondering what kind of life he had led before this moment. "How did you become a Pinkerton agent?" she asked. Harrison glanced at her as he stirred the pot. "My father was a lawman back in Kansas. Got killed trying to stop a bank robbery when I was 16. I took care of my mother and sister for a few years, working odd jobs, but I always wanted to follow in his footsteps. When I turned 20, I joined the Pinkertons. Spent the next 10 years tracking criminals across the territory." "What made you quit?" His expression darkened. "I saw too much corruption. Too many rich men getting away with crimes while poor men hanged for stealing a loaf of bread. The Pinkertons work for whoever pays them, and sometimes that meant working for people I didn't respect. I wanted to do the right thing, not just the profitable thing, so I quit 6 months ago and started working as an independent investigator." "Is that how you got involved with my brother's case?" "Daniel found me in Denver. He knew he was in trouble, and he knew the local law wouldn't help him. He hired me to prove his innocence and protect you if anything happened to him." Harrison ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. "He loves you very much. He was terrified of what Granger might do to you." Adelaide's throat tightened. "Where is he now? Is he safe?" "He's hiding in the mountains north of here. I've been in contact with him, bringing him supplies and information. Once I have enough evidence to clear his name, he can come out of hiding." Harrison sat across from her and pushed a bowl toward her. "Eat. You need your strength." The stew was simple but delicious, and Adelaide ate every bite, feeling warmth and strength seeping back into her body. Harrison ate more slowly, watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes. "What happens now?" Adelaide asked when she had finished. "Now you rest and recover. Tomorrow I'll show you around the area, teach you how to use the rifle in case you need to protect yourself while I'm gone. I need to make a trip to Denver in a few days to meet with some contacts, people who might be willing to testify against Granger. It'll take me about a week. You're leaving me here alone. You'll be safer here than anywhere else. No one knows about this cabin except me, but I'll teach you everything you need to know to take care of yourself." He paused. "Unless you'd rather I take you to Denver with me. I have a friend there, a woman who runs a boarding house. She could look after you." Adelaide considered this, then shook her head. "No, if this is the safest place, then I should stay here. I'm not afraid of being alone, I'm just afraid of being helpless." Admiration flickered in Harrison's eyes. "You're stronger than you know, Adelaide. Most women would have fallen apart after what you've been through." "I wanted to," she admitted. "When they put those shackles on me, when they made me stand on that block, I wanted to disappear into the ground. But I kept thinking about Daniel, about how he must be suffering knowing what happened to me. I had to stay strong for him." "You can lean on me now," Harrison said quietly. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." The simple kindness in his words broke through the walls Adelaide had been building around her emotions. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands, embarrassed to be crying in front of this stranger who had already done so much for her. She heard the scrape of a chair, and then Harrison was kneeling beside her, not touching her but offering his presence as comfort. "It's all right," he said gently. "Let it out. You've earned the right to cry." Adelaide sobbed until she had no tears left, and through it all, Harrison stayed beside her, a quiet, steady presence. When she finally lifted her head, he handed her a clean handkerchief, and she wiped her face, feeling lighter somehow, as if the tears had washed away some of the horror of the past days. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. You're welcome." Harrison stood and moved back to his chair, giving her space again. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Adelaide nodded and stood on shaky legs. Harrison handed her one of his clean shirts to sleep in, then turned his back while she changed and climbed into the bed. The quilt smelled like pine and wood smoke, and the mattress was surprisingly comfortable. She heard Harrison moving around the cabin, banking the fire and preparing his bedroll on the floor. "Harrison," she called softly into the darkness. "Yes. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have just given Daniel the information and walked away." There was a long silence, and Adelaide thought perhaps he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came through the darkness, rough with emotion. "Because a long time ago, someone helped my sister when she needed it most. A man she didn't know paid off a debt that would have destroyed her and asked nothing in return. I never got the chance to thank him, to pay him back. Maybe this is my way of passing that kindness forward." Adelaide felt her heart squeeze. "Your sister was lucky to have you watching over her. And your brother is lucky to have you." Adelaide closed her eyes, feeling safe for the first time in days. Despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty of the future, she knew that Harrison Moss would keep his word. And that knowledge allowed her to finally slip into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Adelaide woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows and birds sang in the trees outside. For a moment she forgot where she was, and then memory came rushing back. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, but the panic subsided when she saw Harrison at the stove, his back to her, cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash up." Adelaide climbed out of bed, suddenly self-conscious in his oversized shirt, and quickly washed her face and hands in the basin of cool water Harrison had left on the table. Her dress from yesterday was draped over a chair, and she changed back into it behind a blanket Harrison had thoughtfully hung in the corner for privacy. When she emerged, Harrison was setting plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits on the table. "Sit. Eat while it's hot." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Adelaide marveled at how natural it felt to share a meal with this man she had met only yesterday. There was something solid and reliable about Harrison, a calm strength that made her feel protected without feeling diminished. After breakfast, Harrison took her outside and showed her around the property. The cabin sat in a small meadow surrounded by dense pine forest, with a clear creek running nearby. There was a small barn where Harrison kept his horse and a sturdy chicken coop that explained the fresh eggs. "I built most of this myself," Harrison explained as they walked. "Bought the land with my savings, figured I'd eventually retire here. It's peaceful, away from the chaos of towns and cities." "It's beautiful," Adelaide said honestly. "I can see why you chose it." Harrison showed her how to work the water pump, how to gather eggs from the chickens, and how to identify edible plants in the surrounding forest. Then he took her back to the cabin and brought out a rifle from a locked cabinet. "Have you ever fired a gun?" he asked. "No." "Then it's time you learned." He spent the next hour teaching her how to load, aim, and fire the rifle, setting up targets on the far side of the meadow. Adelaide was surprised to find that she had a natural steadiness, and by the end of the lesson, she was hitting the targets more often than not. "You're a quick learner," Harrison said with approval. "Remember, this is for protection only. If someone comes around while I'm gone, you fire a warning shot first. Most people will turn tail and run. But if they don't, you aim to stop them, understand?" Adelaide nodded, hoping she would never have to use the weapon in earnest. They spent the rest of the day working around the cabin, and Harrison shared more details about his investigation into Granger's activities. He had ledgers and documents hidden in the cabin, evidence he had been collecting for weeks. As he explained the case, Adelaide began to understand the complexity of what he was attempting. Granger isn't just a mine owner, Harrison said. He's connected to several other businesses, all of them barely legal. He uses intimidation and bribery to maintain control, and anyone who crosses him tends to disappear or have accidents. Your brother stumbled onto evidence of his money laundering operation, and Granger couldn't let that information get out. So Daniel really is innocent, completely. In fact, he was trying to gather evidence to report Granger to the authorities when he was discovered. Granger moved fast, doctored the books to make Daniel look guilty, and then Daniel had no choice but to run. Harrison's jaw tightened. What Granger did to you was his way of sending a message, showing what happens to people who cross him. Then he needs to be stopped, Adelaide said fiercely. Not just for Daniel and me, but for everyone else he's hurt. That's exactly what I intend to do. Harrison met her eyes, and Adelaide saw the same determination she felt reflected in his gaze. But it has to be done right, with evidence that will stand up in court. Otherwise, he'll just buy his way out of trouble. Over the next few days, Harrison and Adelaide fell into an easy rhythm. They worked together during the days, with Harrison teaching her survival skills and Adelaide helping him organize his evidence. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Harrison would tell her stories of his investigations, while Adelaide shared memories of her life before the nightmare began. Adelaide learned that Harrison had a dry sense of humor that would catch her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. She learned that he was well-read and thoughtful, that he had a passion for justice that went beyond mere professional duty. She learned that he was kind to animals, patient with her questions, and unfailingly respectful of her boundaries. And she began to realize that what she felt for Harrison Moss was more than simple gratitude. There was something deeper growing between them, a connection that went beyond the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. She found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, admiring the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Harrison seemed to feel it too. She caught him staring at her sometimes, saw the way his expression softened when she smiled, noticed how he found excuses to stand close to her when they worked together. But he never acted on it, never crossed the invisible line he had drawn between them that first night. On the evening before Harrison was to leave for Denver, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Adelaide felt a tightness in her chest at the thought of him leaving, even though she knew it was necessary. "I'll be back in a week," Harrison said, as if reading her thoughts. "Maybe less if everything goes smoothly. I know I'll be fine here. I have no doubt about that." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were almost silver. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something before I go." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" Harrison took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. "When I bought you at that auction, I told myself it was purely about justice, about doing the right thing, and it was at first. But over these past few days, I've come to care for you in a way I didn't expect, in a way I have no right to, considering the circumstances." He held up a hand when Adelaide started to speak. "Please, let me finish. I know you've been through hell, and I know your feelings right now are probably confused. Gratitude can feel like something more, but it isn't. So I'm telling you this not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserve honesty. When I come back from Denver, if you want to leave, If you want me to take you somewhere else where you can start fresh, I'll do that. No questions asked. Adelaide stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. And if I don't want to leave? Then you can stay as long as you like. This cabin, everything I have, it's yours if you need it. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I would do anything to keep you safe, Adelaide. Anything. Adelaide reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Harrison, what I feel for you isn't gratitude. Or rather, it's not just gratitude. You've shown me more respect and kindness in a few days than most men show in a lifetime. You've made me feel safe and valued and seen. You've made me laugh when I thought I'd never laugh again. And when I look at you, when I'm near you, I feel something I've never felt before. Harrison's hand tightened on hers. Adelaide, you don't have to say this. I want to. You've been honest with me, and I owe you the same honesty. She took a deep breath. I'm falling in love with you, Harrison Moss. Maybe I've been falling since the moment you unlocked those shackles and gave me back my freedom. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but it's the truth. For a moment, Harrison just stared at her, and Adelaide's heart sank, thinking she had made a terrible mistake. Then he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. When I come back, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when this is all over and you're truly free, not just legally but in every way, I'm going to court you properly. I'm going to take my time and do this right. But Adelaide, I need you to know that I'm already yours. My heart belongs to you, and it has since the moment I saw you standing on that platform with your head held high and fire in your eyes. Adelaide felt tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. Harrison reached up and wiped them away with his thumb, then, very slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, reverent, and Adelaide felt it all the way to her toes. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. I'll be back before you know it, Harrison whispered against her forehead. And then we'll start building a life together if you'll have me. I'll have you, Adelaide said. I'll wait for you. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, holding hands and making quiet plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. Adelaide knew there were still challenges ahead, that Daniel still needed to be cleared and Granger brought to justice, but with Harrison beside her, she believed anything was possible. The next morning, Harrison left before dawn. Adelaide woke to find him standing beside the bed, already dressed for travel, his saddlebags packed and ready. He kissed her forehead gently, whispered a promise to return, and then he was gone, his horse's hoofbeats fading into the morning mist. The cabin felt emptier without Harrison's presence, but Adelaide refused to mope. She threw herself into tasks, keeping herself busy with chores and practice with the rifle. She explored the surrounding forest, careful to stay within the boundaries Harrison had shown her, and she spent her evenings reading books from Harrison's small collection and working on organizing his evidence into a more coherent format. On the fourth day, Adelaide was gathering eggs when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Her heart leaped, thinking Harrison had returned early, but when she looked toward the trail, she saw an unfamiliar figure. Her blood ran cold, and she quickly ran to the cabin, grabbing the rifle and positioning herself at the window where she could see out but remain hidden. The rider was a tall man with a thick beard and expensive clothing, and Adelaide recognized him from Rico. It was one of Marcus Granger's associates, a man named Thomas Reeves who ran several of the saloons in town. He dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously. "Miss Norton," he called out, "I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." Adelaide kept the rifle trained on him, her heart pounding. Say what you came to say and leave. Smart to be cautious. Granger knows you're up here somewhere. He's been asking questions, offering rewards for information about where Moss took you. Reeves held up his hands to show he was unarmed. But I'm not here for Granger. I'm here because I want out. I want to testify against him, and I heard Moss is collecting evidence. Why should I believe you? Adelaide demanded. Because Granger killed my brother 3 years ago, made it look like a mining accident. I've been working for him ever since, too afraid to leave, but I can't do it anymore. Not after what he did to you. That was too far even for him. Reeves's voice cracked. I have evidence, documents that prove what Granger's been doing, but I need protection and I need to talk to Moss. Adelaide's mind raced. This could be the breakthrough Harrison needed, but it could also be a trap. Harrison isn't here. I figured. But you can get a message to him, can't you? Tell him to meet me in 3 days at the old mill outside of Silverton. I'll bring everything I have. Reeves started backing toward his horse. Please, Miss Norton. This is my only chance to make things right. Before Adelaide could respond, Reeves mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the trees. Adelaide lowered the rifle with shaking hands. She had no way to contact Harrison, no way to know if Reeves was telling the truth or setting a trap. All she could do was wait and hope that Harrison returned before the proposed meeting time. The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Adelaide jumped at every sound, expecting either Harrison's return or more of Granger's men. She slept with the rifle beside the bed and kept the cabin locked tight at night. By the morning of the 6th day, she was wound so tight she thought she might snap. Then, finally, she heard the sound she had been waiting for. Harrison's distinctive whistle echoed through the trees, the signal they had agreed upon, and Adelaide ran from the cabin to meet him. He had barely dismounted before she threw herself into his arms and he caught her, holding her tight. I'm here, he murmured into her hair. God, I missed you. I missed you too. Adelaide pulled back enough to look at him and saw that he looked tired but triumphant. How did it go in Denver? Better than I hoped. I have 3 witnesses willing to testify against Granger, including a banker who can prove the money laundering. But we can talk about that inside. You're trembling. What happened? Adelaide told him about Reeves's visit, watching as Harrison's expression grew serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, thinking. It could be a trap, he said finally. But it also could be genuine. Reeves's brother did die in suspicious circumstances, and he would have access to the kind of evidence we need. What are we going to do? We are going to do nothing. I am going to meet Reeves, and you are going to stay here where it's safe. Harrison held up a hand when Adelaide started to protest. Adelaide, I can't risk you. If this is a trap, if something goes wrong, I need to know you're safe. And I need to know you're safe, Adelaide argued. 2 guns are better than 1, and you taught me how to shoot. The answer is no. This is not up for debate. Harrison's voice was firm, but Adelaide could see the fear in his eyes, fear for her safety. They argued about it for the rest of the day, with Adelaide refusing to back down. She had spent too much of her life being protected and sheltered, and look where that had gotten her. She wanted to fight, wanted to be part of bringing down the man who had caused so much suffering. Finally, as the sun was setting, Harrison sighed in defeat. If I agree to let you come, you have to promise to follow my instructions exactly. No heroics, no taking risks. You stay where I tell you to stay, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed, Adelaide said immediately. I must be out of my mind, Harrison muttered, but he pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. When this is over, we're going to have a long talk about you being too stubborn for your own good. When this is over, you can say anything you want, Adelaide replied, smiling against his lips. They spent that evening planning, going over every possible scenario and what they would do in each case. Harrison made Adelaide practice with the rifle until he was satisfied with her accuracy, and they went to bed late, wrapped in each other's arms, finding comfort and strength in their closeness. The ride to Silverton took most of the next day. The old mill Reeves had mentioned sat on the outskirts of town, a decrepit building that had been abandoned when a newer facility opened closer to the mines. Harrison and Adelaide approached cautiously, leaving their horses tied in the trees a quarter-mile away and proceeding on foot. Harrison positioned Adelaide behind a large boulder with a clear view of the mill entrance. "Stay here. Keep the rifle ready, but don't shoot unless I give the signal or unless you see Granger's men moving on me." "Understood," Adelaide nodded, her palms sweating as she gripped the rifle. Harrison squeezed her shoulder once, then moved forward, approaching the mill with his hand near his gun. Adelaide watched through the scope of her rifle, her heart in her throat. Reeves emerged from the mill right on time, carrying a leather satchel. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush. Harrison stopped about 20 feet from him. "You have the documents?" Harrison called, "Right here. Everything you need to hang Granger." Reeves held up the satchel. "Can you protect me? He'll kill me when he finds out what I've done." "I have contacts in Denver who can get you out of the territory. New identity, fresh start, but I need to see the documents first." Reeves started to move forward, and that's when Adelaide saw them. 4 men emerging from the trees on the far side of the mill, moving to flank Harrison. It was a trap after all. She didn't hesitate. Adelaide fired a shot into the air, and Harrison dropped and rolled, his gun already in his hand. Reeves cursed and dove for cover as bullets started flying. Adelaide aimed carefully and fired at the man closest to Harrison, hitting him in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. Harrison was moving, using the mill structure for cover, his gun blazing. Adelaide kept firing, providing cover, forcing the attackers to divide their attention. She saw Harrison take down another man, saw Reeves trying to crawl away through the dust and chaos. Then she saw a 5th man, one she recognized from the auction, circling around to come up behind Harrison's position. Without thinking, Adelaide left her protected spot and ran forward, shouting a warning. Harrison spun and fired just as the man raised his gun and the attacker went down. But Adelaide's movement had exposed her, and she felt a bullet whiz past her head, so close she felt the heat of it. Harrison was at her side in an instant, pulling her down behind a fallen wagon. "I told you to stay put," he growled, but his hands were running over her, checking for injuries. "The man behind you," Adelaide gasped. "I know, thank you, but if you ever scare me like that again, I swear I'll lock you in that cabin." He kissed her hard, then pulled back. "Can you make it to those trees?" Adelaide looked where he was pointing and nodded. "What about you?" "I'm going after Reeves. He dropped the satchel when the shooting started. That evidence is everything." Harrison waited for a lull in the gunfire, then gave her a push. "Go, now." Adelaide ran, her heart pounding, bullets kicking up dust around her feet. She made it to the trees and took cover, turning back to provide support. She saw Harrison sprinting toward where Reeves had dropped the satchel, saw him scoop it up and tuck it inside his coat. The remaining attackers were retreating now, dragging their wounded with them, and within minutes, the shooting stopped. Silence fell over the mill, broken only by the sound of Adelaide's ragged breathing. Harrison emerged from cover cautiously, his gun still drawn, his eyes scanning for threats. When he was satisfied they were alone, he holstered his weapon and strode toward Adelaide with such purpose that she thought he might be angry. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking and realized he was just as scared as she was. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered fiercely. "When I saw you running toward me when I heard that bullet pass you, I thought my heart would stop." "I'm sorry," Adelaide said, clinging to him. "I had to warn you, I know, and you probably saved my life." "But Adelaide, if something had happened to you, I wouldn't have survived it." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes blazing with emotion. "I love you, do you hear me? I love you more than my own life, and I can't lose you. You love me." Adelaide whispered, even though he had essentially already said as much days ago. Hearing it now, in the aftermath of danger, made it feel more real somehow. "I love you," Harrison repeated. "I've never said those words to anyone before, but I'm saying them now. I love you, Adelaide Norton, and when this is over, I'm going to marry you if you'll have me." Adelaide laughed, feeling giddy with relief and joy and lingering fear. "That's a terrible proposal." "I'll do better when we're not standing in a battlefield," Harrison promised and kissed her again. They found Reeves hiding in the mill, terrified and ashamed. He confirmed that Granger had forced him to set the trap, threatening to kill his wife and children if he didn't cooperate. But he had also managed to slip the real documents into the satchel before the shooting started, hoping that somehow Harrison would survive and the evidence would make it into the right hands. Harrison decided to take both Adelaide and Reeves to Denver immediately, before Granger could organize another attempt. They rode through the night, switching horses at a relay station Harrison knew, and arrived in Denver exhausted but alive as the sun rose over the city. Harrison's contacts in the territorial government were as good as he had promised. Within days, warrants were issued for Marcus Granger's arrest, and a federal marshal was dispatched to Rico. The evidence Harrison had gathered, combined with Reeves's testimony and documents, painted a damning picture of corruption, theft, and murder that even Granger's money and influence couldn't overcome. Daniel Norton emerged from hiding, thin and haggard but alive, and Adelaide wept with relief as she embraced her brother. Daniel thanked Harrison with tears in his eyes, apologizing over and over for everything Adelaide had endured because of him. "You have nothing to apologize for," Harrison said firmly. "Granger is the one responsible, and he's going to pay for what he did." The trial took place in Denver 2 months later, with Harrison testifying as the lead investigator. Adelaide attended every day, sitting in the front row with Daniel beside her, watching as the case she and Harrison had built together brought down one of the most powerful men in Colorado. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, Adelaide felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Granger was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, and his assets were seized to repay his victims. Daniel was fully exonerated, his name cleared, and he was offered his old position back. He declined, saying he was ready for a fresh start somewhere far from the mines and the memories. Through all of this, Harrison never left Adelaide's side. He had rented a small house on the outskirts of Denver where they stayed together, with Daniel as their chaperone to preserve propriety. Harrison was attentive and devoted, courting Adelaide properly as he had promised, bringing her flowers and taking her for walks in the park, and treating her like she was something precious. One evening in October, with the aspens turning gold in the mountains and a crisp chill in the air, Harrison asked Adelaide to take a walk with him. They strolled through a park near their house, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and Adelaide knew what was coming before Harrison stopped and turned to face her. He took both her hands in his, and she saw that his own hands were trembling slightly. "Adelaide Norton, I told you once that I would do this properly, that I would take my time and court you the way you deserved. I hope I've done that. I hope I've shown you how much you mean to me." "You have," Adelaide said softly. Every single day. Harrison smiled, then dropped to one knee. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Adelaide, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've made me believe in love when I thought I had forgotten how. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful, and Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Harrison, I'll marry you." Harrison stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon. Around them, other park visitors applauded, but Adelaide barely heard them. All she could focus on was the man in her arms, the man who had saved her and fought for her and loved her with everything he had. They were married 3 weeks later in a small church in Denver, with Daniel walking Adelaide down the aisle and a handful of Harrison's friends from his Pinkerton days in attendance. Adelaide wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, and Harrison wore his best suit, his gray eyes shining with love as he watched her approach. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Adelaide with such tenderness that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Afterward, they had a modest celebration at a local restaurant, with good food and music and laughter that chased away the shadows of the difficult months before. That night, Harrison carried Adelaide over the threshold of their new home, the cabin in the mountains that had become a sanctuary. He had spent the previous week making improvements, adding a proper bedroom with a door for privacy and expanding the kitchen. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Their first night as husband and wife was everything Adelaide had dreamed of and more. Harrison was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Adelaide felt cherished and safe. They learned each other's bodies with wonder and care, and when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled in the quilts, Harrison's fingers tracing idle patterns on Adelaide's arm. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Adelaide turned to look at him, at this man who had given her everything. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." "Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Adelaide Moss." Adelaide smiled at her new name. "I love you too, Harrison Moss." They settled into married life with ease, as if they had been together for years rather than months. Harrison continued his work as an investigator, taking on cases that interested him, those involving injustice or people who had nowhere else to turn. Adelaide started a small school in Rico, teaching children whose families lived too far from town for regular schooling. The townspeople who had once watched her being sold at auction now greeted her with respect and admiration, ashamed of their earlier complicity. Daniel stayed with them for a few months before moving to California, where he had found work with a reputable firm. He wrote to them regularly, his letters full of gratitude and updates on his new life. Adelaide was glad he had found peace, though she missed having her brother nearby. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with deep snows that often kept them isolated in the cabin for days at a time. But Adelaide didn't mind. She and Harrison would spend those snowbound days reading together by the fire, playing cards, making love, and planning for the future they were building together. It was during one of those snowstorms in late January of 1882 that Adelaide realized she was pregnant. At first she wasn't sure, but as the signs became undeniable, a mixture of joy and nervousness filled her. She waited until she was certain before telling Harrison, wanting to be sure. She chose an evening when Harrison had been particularly tender, when they were sitting together on their bed with him reading aloud from a book of poetry. Adelaide placed her hand over his, stilling his reading. "Harrison, I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby." Harrison stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face. "A baby, truly, truly." Adelaide felt her own smile matching his. "Sometime in August, I think." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "This is the best news, the very best news." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes searching. "Are you happy about it? I know we didn't plan this so soon." "I'm thrilled," Adelaide assured him. "A little scared, maybe, but mostly just happy." "You're going to be an amazing mother," Harrison said softly. "Our child is so lucky to have you. And you," Adelaide said, "you're going to be a wonderful father." Harrison's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "I hope so. I hope I can give our child the kind of life my father gave me before he died, full of love and laughter and safety." "You will," Adelaide promised. "We both will." The pregnancy progressed well, though Adelaide suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months. Harrison doted on her, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, holding her hair when she was sick, and never once complaining. As her belly grew and summer approached, Harrison became even more protective, insisting she rest more and work less. Adelaide compromised, closing her school for the summer and focusing on preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric Harrison brought back from Denver, and together they converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery, with a beautiful wooden cradle Harrison built with his own hands. On a hot August afternoon, Adelaide's labor began. Harrison rode to Rico to fetch the midwife, a competent woman named Mrs. Patterson who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Harrison stayed by Adelaide's side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, and looking increasingly terrified as the hours wore on. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, his tiny face red and wrinkled and perfect. Mrs. Patterson cleaned him up and placed him in Adelaide's arms, and Adelaide looked down at her baby with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He's beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Harrison was crying too, unashamed as he looked at his son. "He's perfect. You're perfect." He kissed Adelaide's forehead, then gently touched the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Adelaide knew exactly what his name should be. "Henry, after your father." Harrison's face crumpled with emotion. "Adelaide, are you sure?" "I'm sure. Henry Thomas Moss." She looked up at her husband. "Your father was a good man who died protecting others. I want our son to carry his name and his legacy." "Thank you," Harrison whispered, kissing her gently. "Thank you for everything. For this son, for your love, for choosing me." "I would choose you every time," Adelaide said. "In every life, in every world, I would always choose you." The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Henry was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Henry when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the baby settled. Adelaide recovered from the birth slowly, and Harrison insisted on hiring a woman from town to help with the housework so Adelaide could rest. Gradually, their life found a new rhythm, one that accommodated the demands of a young baby while maintaining the love and partnership that had always been the foundation of their marriage. When Henry was 6 months old, Daniel came to visit, bringing gifts and exclaiming over his nephew. He stayed for 2 weeks, and Adelaide was glad to see that he seemed genuinely happy in his new life. He had met a woman in California, he confided, and was thinking of proposing. "Do it," Adelaide encouraged. "Life is too short not to grab happiness when you find it." Daniel smiled. "I learned that from watching you and Harrison. What you two have, it's special. I want that for myself." After Daniel left, life continued its peaceful course. Harrison took fewer dangerous cases now that he was a father, focusing more on legal investigations and consultations. Adelaide reopened her school when Henry was a year old, bringing him with her and letting the older children help watch him while she taught. The years passed in a blur of small moments that added up to a beautiful life. Henry's first steps, his first words, his first day helping his father in the barn. The birth of their second child, a daughter they named Grace, who had Adelaide's dark eyes and Harrison's quick smile. More cases solved, more injustices righted, more people helped. The cabin expanded as their family grew, with Harrison adding rooms and making improvements. What had started as a simple shelter became a real home, filled with laughter and love and the chaos of children. Henry grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books and horses, while Grace was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief. When Henry was 10 and Grace was 7, Adelaide gave birth to another son, whom they named William. Harrison joked that they should probably stop there, but he said it while cradling William with such tenderness that Adelaide knew he would welcome however many children they were blessed with. The years continued to pass, and Adelaide sometimes thought about how differently her life could have turned out. If Harrison hadn't been there that day in Rico, if he hadn't had the money to buy her freedom, if he hadn't been the kind of man who would sacrifice his dreams for a stranger, she would have been sold to someone cruel, would have lived a life of suffering and degradation, might not have survived at all. Instead, she had this beautiful life. This man who still looked at her like she hung the moon, these children who filled their days with joy. She taught at her school, watching young minds blossom under her care. She had friends in town, people who respected her and valued her contributions to the community. She had her health, her freedom, her dignity. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Adelaide by taking her back to Denver for a weekend, leaving the children in the care of Mrs. Patterson. They stayed in a nice hotel and attended the theater, and Harrison bought Adelaide a new dress in the latest fashion. But the best part was simply being alone together, reconnecting as husband and wife rather than just parents. On their last night in Denver, Harrison took Adelaide dancing. She was rusty, not having danced in years, but Harrison was patient, guiding her around the floor with skill. As they swayed to the music, Harrison looked down at her with those gray eyes that still made her heart skip. "You remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "On the auction block. How could I forget? I saw you before that, actually. The day before. I was in Rico investigating, and I saw you being taken to the jail. You were fighting them every step of the way, and I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so fierce." He spun her gently. "I asked around about you, learned your story, and I knew I had to help. But I had no idea that helping you would be the best decision I ever made." "I love you," Adelaide said, not for the first time but with no less feeling. "I love the life we've built together. Here's to 10 more years," Harrison said. "And 10 after that, and 10 after that, until we're old and gray and watching our grandchildren play in the meadow." "I'll take that deal," Adelaide said, and kissed him as the music swelled around them. They kept that promise, growing old together in the cabin in the mountains. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, becoming an investigator focused on helping people who couldn't afford legal representation. Grace surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in Colorado. William took over the ranch that Harrison had finally started, raising cattle and horses on land adjacent to the cabin. All three children married and had families of their own, and Harrison and Adelaide's cabin became the center of a sprawling, loving family. On summer evenings, the meadow would fill with grandchildren playing while their parents sat on the expanded porch, and Harrison and Adelaide would watch it all with grateful hearts. As they grew older, their love only deepened. They knew each other's minds and hearts so completely that sometimes they didn't need words. Harrison's hair went silver, and Adelaide's went white, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who had risked everything to save a stranger, and the young woman who had refused to be broken by injustice. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Harrison stood and raised his glass in a toast. His hand shook slightly with age, but his voice was still strong. 50 years ago, I made the best investment of my life. I spent $2,000 to free a woman from slavery, and in return, I received a lifetime of love, a family beyond my wildest dreams, and more happiness than any man deserves. He looked at Adelaide, his eyes still the same stormy gray. Adelaide Moss, you are my heart, my partner, my everything. Here's to 50 more years. I don't think we have 50 more years, Adelaide said dryly, making everyone laugh. But I'll take whatever time we have left as long as it's with you. They clinked glasses, and their family cheered, and Adelaide felt a peace settle over her that was complete and whole. She had been through darkness and come out the other side. She had been bought and sold like property, but she had found a man who saw her as a person, as an equal, as someone worth fighting for. More than that, she had found love, real and true and lasting. The kind of love that weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. The kind of love that built a family and a legacy. The kind of love that made all the suffering worth it because it had led her to this moment, this place, this life. Harrison took her hand as the party continued around them, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm the way he had done for 50 years. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Adelaide looked around at the life they had built together, at the children and grandchildren who existed because they had found each other, at the home they had made in this mountain meadow. She thought about all the people Harrison had helped over the years, all the injustices they had fought together, all the small kindnesses they had shown to others. Not a single one, she said, and meant it with all her heart. They lived 5 more years after that anniversary. Years filled with more laughter, more grandchildren, more quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. When Harrison finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, Adelaide held his hand and whispered all the things they had always said to each other. "I love you. Thank you. I'll see you again someday." She lived another year after that, long enough to see Henry appointed as a territorial judge, and Grace open her own practice in Denver. Long enough to hold her newest great-grandchild and tell him stories about his great-grandfather. Long enough to write down her story so that future generations would know that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances, that one person's courage could change everything, that choosing kindness over cruelty mattered. When Adelaide passed away quietly one spring morning, surrounded by her family, her last thought was of Harrison. Of the first time she had seen him pushing through the crowd, of the moment he had unlocked her shackles, of the thousands of small moments that had made up their life together. She had been sold to cover a debt she didn't owe, but the mysterious cowboy who had investigated and freed her had given her something infinitely more valuable than freedom. He had given her love, family, purpose, and a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. They buried her next to Harrison in the meadow behind the cabin, under the aspens that turned gold every autumn. And if you visit that place today, you can still see their graves, side by side. Two people who had started as strangers and become soulmates. The cabin still stands, maintained by their descendants, a testament to what they built together. And on summer evenings, when the sun sets over the San Juan Mountains and the wind whispers through the pines, it's easy to imagine them there still, sitting on the porch holding hands, watching the stars come out, together for all eternity.